years or so to write this piece. He started when he was in his 20s, and it was around the time where his mentor, Robert Schumann, was trying to commit suicide. And so it was a very dark time, and Brahms worked on it for a while and read it. And then about 20 years later, in his 40s now, he rewrote a lot of it, but the third movement stayed the same. And that is very special because throughout this whole time, he had been deeply in love with Robert Schumann's wife, Clara, and he saw it as a forbidden love because obviously Clara always belonged to Robert, even after death. But he wrote a lot of music for her, or to her, including the theme from this third movement, which stayed intact for these 20 years. So about 100 years before he premiered this piece, a young Goethe had written a novel called The Sorrows of Young Werther. And it was an amazing novel that took the entire continent by storm. It was a love triangle, and the hero, or the anti-hero, commits suicide at the end because he is so tormented by this unrequited love. And that is important to our story because when Brahms was finally ready to publish this piece, he wrote to his publisher, "I want to have a portrait of someone who looks like Werther in his fashion, holding a gun to his head." So obviously, he's thinking about something very painful in this work. And you can imagine the burden I felt the first time I read this piece when I was 18. I was terrified that I wouldn't have had enough suffering in my life to play it properly. Now, I was a freshman at Juilliard, and that year there was a new student at Juilliard as well in the master's program, David Chan. Now, David Chan was like the prince of Juilliard. He was the star of Dorothy DeLay's violin studio. He was winning every competition, and he's today the concertmaster of the Met Opera Orchestra in New York. So in those days, I had a violist friend who knew a cellist, who was a friend of David, and I really wanted to read with David Chan. So I asked my violist friend, "Can you set up a reading for us? And why don't we play this piece because it can show off our maturity?" And so we did. It all happened, and I was amazed. I was playing music with these grad students. And it didn't go as I expected because as we were playing all these terribly tormented chords, my violist friend was smiling at the cellist, who was smiling back at her. And by the third movement, where the cellist plays that beautiful love theme, I was feeling completely like a third wheel. But it was okay, because shortly after that reading, they started going steady, and so it was all a happy ending. Now, the second time that I played this piece was a few years later. I was 23, and I was a fellow at the Tanglewood Music Center. I was married by then, so I felt like I could claim some depth to my personality now. And we really nailed all of the depressing bits so well. And afterwards, we just felt so powerful that we can make people feel bad. And so I consider that a success. And this time, my age is now over 23. And I feel really drawn to the ambivalence in his music, the complexity, the intertwined joy and sorrow. In every single phrase, there's more than one emotion, and that is just so incredible and so fun to play and to interpret. Striking things about this. The first is that it starts out with sighing, right? But it feels like he's stuck there. And only on the third try does he go past it. Now listen to the top here, because the top the top note ends after the other two. So there's this feeling of being really heavy and dragging along and not being able to get to where you want to go. And after this, all of a sudden we change keys. So there's no preparation. There's this feeling of being lost. Like, we don't know how this came to be, but here we are. Now wait a second. This sounds pretty happy, right? There's a major chord in the middle of this most depressing movement. What's going on there? So here we have major, and then we're dark again, and then bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, and then a totally new key area. And we're going to keep moving, but we don't know where it's going. Different key area, and then we think we're here, but we're not. It totally changes the key, and finally we get back to C minor. So that whole area of being totally fragmented and disoriented produces a character. It produces the character of being unsettled. The second theme is a complete contrast. Now we have a very, very long phrase. Now he could have made that half as long. He could have ended right here. And it would have been fine, right? But he doesn't. He expands. And so with this expansion, there is expansion in the length of the phrase. There's expansion in the register, because listen to how the bass goes down. Isn't that so fulfilling to have it go all the way down that deep? And then also to have the hemiola. Did anyone hear the hemiola? Shall we give it a listen? So here it goes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we don't stay happy too long because we start to get this motive here is very driven. And we get 3 of them per measure. And if you like to count, anyone out there who likes to count, there are 22 1/3 measures of this. Okay, so, yeah, I like to count. I counted. By the end, he's going. Okay, so he's getting pretty angry here. In the second movement, this basically is the driving rhythm for the entire movement, and it becomes, okay, in the left hand. So listen for that motor. It's going to keep going for quite a while. But then we get the rest in the third movement. So here's the love theme that we talked about earlier. Isn't that gorgeous? Now, any average composer would have been happy with this. But this is Brahms, and he's a perfectionist, and he gets that right color in the middle of that measure. Isn't that special? It's kind of nostalgic, maybe. He's thinking about some past memory. So it's a little more bittersweet. And then when he goes on, here's a longing, reaching for something, and then sorrow at the top. He's resigned. And it makes me think of Charlie Brown. So my daughter is right now doing a performance of Charlie Brown the musical today, and I'm missing it. And yeah, but there's this great line. Charlie Brown says, "Today, I'm going to talk to that little red-haired girl and tell her how I feel about her. Or I'll just sit here." And this is what I felt when I played this phrase. That's exactly what's going on in the music, is he has this hope and then he doesn't know how to make it actually happen. Now let's go on to the phrase, because he starts again. Now here's my favorite part. Okay, it's my favorite part because there's a lot of chromatic moments in there. And in a regular scale, you have mostly whole steps. But in a chromatic scale, you have half steps. And it's so much more expressive when you add those little notes in between. That's what sharps and flats are so useful for. So here we have, if it was just a regular scale, it would sound like this, which is very pretty. But if we have the chromatic note, then you get that little squeeze in there, which is so, so beautiful. Now, in the third movement, let's see. I'll let you listen to the rest of it as we play it and go on to the fourth movement, which is a huge contrast because now it's full of mystery. It's back to being dark and in the shadows. And what's so interesting about this theme is that it all starts on the upbeat, every little piece of it. So here's the downbeat. Feels like it's restless. So here we have the physical feature of upbeats translating into a restless movement. And even at the end, we're still hearing all these upbeats that are displaced. So for instance, in this little bit, already it's pretty bizarre because it's all fragments, right? But add to that everything starts on the upbeat, so it's even more strange and mysterious. And then it comes down on a chromatic scale for a very long time. Okay, and that's pretty much how the piece ends. It's on a chromatic scale. It's very memorable. So I'm going to conclude with this thought that tragedy has a very important place and it unfreezes a part of us. In the book, The Giver, the society had banished sorrow, and then they were doomed to live in a complete lie. In the movie Inside Out, everything goes wrong when sadness runs away. So with this piece, we hope that you will find that there is a place for every emotion, and there are so many emotions in this piece. And in acknowledging all of them and paying attention to every one of them, that we can find a sense of being complete. Thank you very much.